getting the news on television and not drawing a line and getting a conclusion that the newscasters are offering, but give some time and patience to the fermentation process of the news developing and unfolding, so that when the good news comes and everything works together for good in the end, we can say, I knew that that was going to happen. My devotion to the law was knowing that I can't see all the details, but I know the outcome is always for greater good. So that's being devoted to the law, the Lord. And David was devoted to the Lord and the law. And so as he did this, his life unfolded according to his devotion in miraculous ways. This shepherd boy became a king, and this poor boy who grew up in lack became an extremely wealthy man, and Bible scholars tell us that he was one of the 10 wealthiest men in the Bible. So his devotion to the law paid off, and that's inspiration for us to say, okay, well, I will understand the law as best I can, and I'll practice the law as best I can. I'll turn on my turn indicator, I'll put the shopping cart back, I'll hold doors open for others, I'll take my bags with me into the store, and instead of fussing about it, I'll be alert and aware, and I even may have another extra bag with me to offer to someone else, because the law of generosity is going to come back and make me richer, and then I'll have more to do with. So I'll try and be a Lord-abiding person. So what happened with David was he was the youngest of several brothers, and his assignment was to take care of the sheep. And so every day he would take the sheep out to the pasture, and he would rotate the pasture because they would just mow it down, and then he'd move to another pasture, and he was always searching for greener pastures. And then while they grazed, he would keep an eye on them, and he would play his harp, and he wrote songs and poetry, kind of like Taylor, what's her first name? Oh, Taylor Swift. Yeah, kind of like her. Just wrote song after song, hit after hit, and he memorized them, and he played them on his little harp. He also had a slingshot, and he would practice with the slingshot during the day, hitting targets, and he had the slingshot in case something was going to approach him or hurt his sheep. And they kind of knew. It's like those in Dubai. They have a pigeon problem with all those beautiful, tall, stunning buildings and architecture. And so they bring out falcons. And the falcon only has to just circle around once for all the pigeons to realize that they don't want to be there. And so they go away. So the slingshot was like just, I'm protecting my environment and my sheep. And and he also had a little cruse of oil in a clay pot with a cork stopper in case he needed to put some oil on a wound that one of the sheep might encounter through the thorns or the bushes or the rocks. And so he was diligent. He played his music. He practiced his hitting the target, and he was prepared for any kind of accidents. And with his spirit of devotion, then he set himself up for really good things to happen. And while he was tending the sheep, he wrote the 23rd Psalm. And he knew about the greener pastures and the valley of the shadow of death, and he knew about the still waters, because when the little lambs would go to get a drink out of the water, they had to be real careful not to fall in the water, because then it would be bye. So he knew about all those elements in the psalm, but he also knew that even though he would have to walk through the valley of the shadow of death, he would fear no evil, for God, whose law he obeyed, was with him and protecting him all the days of his life. And that was his testimony and his belief system, all in writing. Well, one day his mother said, "You're not going to take the sheep out today, but you have to take lunch to your brothers at the battlefield." He felt badly because they all got to go off to the battle, and which would hopefully declare territory and unite all the tribes together. And they were being led by King Saul. And so he felt badly that he was left at home. But when he got to go, he was excited. He took a great amount of food and carried it to the brothers in battle. And he met King Saul. And they were all very down and very sad because they were fighting the Philistines, and they had a weapon, and it was named Goliath. And he was a giant of a man. And he was so much bigger and so intimidating and so scary and strong. And he had a shield and a axe and a spear and a lance and a sword. And he was just fierce. And when they saw him, they trembled because he could just wipe them out. And so David said, and they said, we just don't know what we're going to do. And David said, well, I'm pretty good with a slingshot. Let me have a shot at it. And they said, well, we're so desperate, you go ahead. So David stood there and he wound up his slingshot, and the giant is standing there just, this little kid with a rock is going to, battle with me? And so he let it fly, and the rock with great force hit Goliath between the eyes in the forehead and killed him. And then David took Goliath's very own sword and cut off his head, and then held it up, and then he was the winner. The battle was over, and this led to the union of all the nations, these Jewish tribes, to be one. And then it put him in King Saul's favor. And one time King Saul was really upset and had a lot of anxiety and depression and worry about running his kingdom. This was a few years later. And it was David who played the harp and soothed the king, so much so that he returned to normal and did his duties with elegance and sincerity. But meanwhile, back on the battlefield, Goliath now this is important for your formula of success. Goliath represents an overwhelming giant problem, and it looms over, our problems loom over us, and they intimidate us so, and take away our focus and our awareness of the power that we have, so that we don't know what to do, how to react, and we are babbling off, not knowing what to do. But then, when our devotion to the law comes up and uses its developed skills, that's why we're continually developing our skills and continuing to practice the law as we understand it, then these skills are ready for us to implement when we really need them most. Goliath, being the giant problem, this is where you can see very clearly the symbolism of this. And we are metaphysical people. We're metaphysicians, and we love the Bible. It's the story of how a soul unfolds, and it is Unity's basic textbook. And we like the literal stories, but we also like the symbolism, because we can not only cherish and believe the story that happened and see it happening, the giant, the little kid with the slingshot, but we can also see and believe the meaning, and then we can keep the story and then apply the meaning to our lives. And this gives us twice as much information to go on and to develop with than just if we just took the Bible literally and read it page for page and word for word. By putting ourselves into it and mining out the meaning, then we get more. So then that's part of the kind of people that we are. Well, with Goliath, the frontal lobe of the brain this is where the pituitary gland is, and this is also the calming center of the brain, and it's also where many believe the third eye is. You have a picture of the third eye in your wallet. It's that eye on top of the pyramid on your $1 bill. And so this pituitary gland, once that's clobbered, then it destroys all the functions of the body, breathing and heart and mobility, and it's all over. So that's the significance of and how this could have really happened, that the little rock hit this central location, part of the brain. Well, our brain also, this is a little extra, we have a hind brain, and it's our forebrain that does the thinking and the calming down. And when something upsets us, adrenaline and different enzymes and juices flow through our body and go to the back of the brain so that we can fight or flight. And in caveman times, this was essential for getting out of the way of the saber-toothed tiger. And anybody that said, well, let's think about, here he comes, so let's think about what we could do, is not going to be anybody's ancestor. But the ones that fought and flowed. And if when we get upset, everything goes to the hindbrain for our survival. Someone intimidates us, someone cuts us off in traffic, someone says something awful, or whatever. Our trauma center in the back of our brain helps us find ways to fight or flight. And once we get over the initial shock of what bad thing has happened or could happen, then it takes 20 minutes for the hindbrain to calm down and everything to get back to normal. And then we can think about a solution and figure out what would be the best way to handle this problem. So oftentimes we need to give ourselves time. And with this third eye being temporarily blinded by the activity from our hindbrain, we need to get back into our place where we can see with our third eye the solution, how to manage this, who to forgive, who to love, who to be thankful for, and how this has really turned out to be a blessing in our lives. So David really got Goliath right in the third eye and blinded his vision and put him out of their misery. And that was how that happened. So that made David a hero. And he went to the court of King Saul, and he was favored, he was handsome, he was made beautiful music, and he was conscious of doing the right thing. And this launched him into a wonderful life of being surrounded by the king, the palace life. And he was destined to be the King Saul's replacement. And everyone knew this, and they accepted this. And because the people became more united, and King Saul was a diligent and loving king, things grew and prospered. So that when David inherited his title as king, King David, he then had a wonderful, going, alive kingdom to manage, and his intelligence and his love and his effort to do the best made it even richer and more harmonious and happier. One day, while he was on his balcony, and it's in the book, while he was on his balcony, he observed a woman who was bathing, and as they disrobed her and she bathed, he thought that she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. And he sent for her, and he said, "Who is that?" And since he was the king, everyone did everything he said. So they said, "Well, that's Bathsheba." And he said, "And what's her status?" And they said, "Well, she's the Hittite's wife, and she is married to him, and he's in your army. You've seen him at many of the marches and parades and all, and he's big in battle." And so David sent for Bathsheba, and she came to him, and she was as beautifully dressed as she was undressed. And he fell in love with her, and she, respecting him as the king, obeyed his wishes. And they made love, and they conceived a child. And then she told him of her situation, And he said, and what will we do with your husband? And so he thought about this, and at this point, his devotion to the law became blurred by his lust. He shifted from his pure, on-target behavior to he varied from honoring the law. And so with this variation and with the ability to not think so clearly and be as devoted, he sent Bathsheba's husband off to battle and put him in the front lines where he knew he would be killed. And the battle, he was killed and died. Then that freed Bathsheba to be the wife of David. Then they were married. Then this baby came, and it was a beautiful love child, and they were very happy, and everyone was happy for them. And the happiness of the moment overshadowed the logic and the knowingness that they had done wrong. But everyone was happy for them. And then after the baby was born and everyone was invested and in love with it, it became a very sad day at the palace when the baby died. And David and Bathsheba were grief-stricken, heartbroken, and felt really bad and very guilty. And all this behavior that they had been doing before caught up with them. And it was a very sad time. And they didn't know what to do. And then that sadness rippled out throughout the kingdom. Everyone knew, everyone admitted what had been going on, and it was a downer for everybody. Then a prophet came along, and his name was Nathaniel. And Nathaniel, his name means extended hand and the giving, and he also represents consequences and the understanding of consequences. So he came to David, and he told David the story of a very rich man who had a big flock of goats and sheep, and of a poor man who only had one little, I think it was a goat. And he loved the goat, and he fed the goat at his table, and the goat slept in his arms at night. And the rich man, being not so nice, took the goat from the poor man, and that was all the poor man had, and he took the goat to join his hundreds of goats and sheep. And hearing this story, David went, "Oh, that's awful. That man, that rich man that took that goat, he should be reckoned with." And then Nathaniel said, "David, the rich man is you. You have all this wealth. You're the king, and you have wealth and riches, and people adore you. And then you took something from someone else, and you need to look at that." And so David saw that, understood what the story meant, and then began to reconcile his emotions, his thoughts, his principles, his values with getting back to being of service to the Lord, the law. Now, David's name represents the divinity and the divine one, and it also he is, in the Old Testament, the characterization of the qualities of the Christ. And in the New Testament, is the representative of the qualities of the Christ is Jesus. And it's important to know that Jesus said, "This same presence that I have in me, the Spirit that I have in me, is also in you." So David represents devoted to God, devoted to the law, devoted and loved. And it was his love that created, and the music and the harmony and all the picture that this paints, that created the good at the union of the tribes, the wealth for the people, a kingdom that was superior to anything anyone had ever known. But his vision of how this love could be demonstrated was blurred by his lust for something he shouldn't have wanted, and because she was already taken. and then he did conniving things to make her available to him. So this had already been done, and some would say, well, it's too late. But it's never too late to forgive somebody. It's never too late to wake up and step forward into being the best person that you can be. It's never too late to stop loving, to start loving, to turn the other cheek, to get over it, to step forward. And so David and Bathsheba worked very diligently to be the best that they could be, putting this behind them and stepping out into more service to their kingdom, into more demonstrative love of God, into more love for each other, and into repairing their reputation and being the best that they could be. They worked real hard at this, and they were successful. And then what happened was Bathsheba and David conceived a second child. And this was a happy day in the palace to see this beautiful child come forth. And they named this child Solomon. And Solomon then became the prince and eventually the king. And Solomon had a lot of intelligence and wisdom. He was the one who, during his reign, the two women came with the babies, and he said, well, they both said that a live baby was theirs. And he said, well, it's very simple. Just cut the baby in half and give each of you. And then the real mother said, oh, no, she should have it. And then he knew, he had the wisdom to know that was the real mother, and he solved the problem. He was very wise. He solved a lot of problems. And so from Bathsheba, her name means available. She was available. And so as she was available and there to fulfill this heritage of the royal blood, then David being devoted to the law, the Lord, and then Nathaniel being conscience and consciousness of what's right to do, the hand giving. Then that all led to, while they went they got out of the lines, but they came back in, and when they came back in, they were stronger and more loving and more capable than they'd ever been before. And then they had this child Solomon, who represents wisdom. So the beautiful story is that when you have availability and loving the Lord, and serving the Lord, and being the beloved, and you combine these together, and there is the potential for lust and something to come and blur your vision. When that's put aside and you're back on track, then you produce great wisdom. And then this wisdom comes to prosper on your behalf, your kingdom. So that's the story. And what made Bathsheba the bad girl of the Bible was that the part that she played in this story. So I think it's very empowering to know that you can slay your giants, and that you can learn to give your attention and support to your third eye to see how things might develop and imagine the possibilities, which then leads to the best outcome to come into your life, and that you can make music and soothe the savage beast or the king, and that you can find the love of your life and the passion for doing what you need to do by honoring the law, serving the law, and being the beloved of God. With these thoughts in mind, let's bow our heads and close our eyes. Father, we give thanks for this idea of being of service to you. We give thanks for the beloved part of us. We give thanks for that part of us that develops into wisdom, and that part of us that, although it may stray, it comes back and is reunited with the good to further our highest potential and our higher goals for being the best person that we can be, for giving these ideas to us, and then for our ability to implement them in our lives. Father, we give thanks in your name. Amen.